And we are live. Hello, UK Crime Book Club, and hello, AJ Aberford. Tony is going to tell us about his latest book with Hobeck. And do you want to say hello and just tell us a little bit about The Last Bird of Paradise?
I would be delighted to. Hi, so I'm Tony. My name is Tony Gartland, actually, and you can see at the bottom of the screen it's AJ Aberford. And we were just talking before we came live about why and what that name meant and where I got it from. Obviously, a lot of the series, which features a Maltese police inspector, George Zamit, is based in Malta. And I don't know how many of you know Malta, but it can be a troubled place. And certainly there was the murder of Daphne Caruana Galizia, who made the news, was a blogger, and she got under the skin of local politicians. There was all sorts of problems. So my initial thing was, well, I'm going to write about life in Malta, about crime in Malta, about geopolitics, then perhaps I should sort of just use a pen name. But the publishers sort of beat me to it and put my photograph on the back. So that kind of blew that one, really. But in terms of AJ Aberford, AJ was the name of one of my kids' friends. I just thought it had a nice sort of ring to it. And Aberford, I read in some of the book marketing sort of literature that it gets you to the top left of the shelves, alphabetical, a bit like Aardvark plumbers or AB taxis. So that's how I got the name. And as you said, The Last Bird of Paradise is book number 5 in a series. I started writing during lockdown, really. I was doing a lot of traveling to and from Malta to the UK. My dad was sick, so I was going backwards and forwards, and I was in isolation in the UK, then I was in isolation in Malta, and I spent a lot of time by myself and a lot of time alone, really. So I decided to try and put a story down. But as book 1 came to book 2, came to book 3, I found that a series was actually developing. So what started as a sort of a one-off standalone experiment then became a sort of series with quite a large narrative arc. So I think probably now it's fair enough to call it series. And Last Bird of Paradise is number 5.
We've got quite a few hellos already. We've got Beck from Hobeck is with us, Sarah Blackburn, Malcolm Hollindrake.
Yes.
So we've got a few hellos already, and we're only just getting going. It's really interesting to hear that you just kind of wrote the first one out of boredom, just kind of something to do. And then did you not have any idea that maybe, George would become a real fixture in your life?
Not really. I mean, I remember because in another life I used to, I still do. I own a craft brewery back in the UK. I make beer, and I always swore that all I wanted to do was to make something and to have my beer on a bar and take my dad down and buy a pint of Garkin's beer. And I should have just done that and stopped there, and that would have been great. And it was the same with the book. I thought I would write a book and I'd see it on a shelf and pat myself on the back and tick that box. But no, it was never a great ambition, I must admit. But in Malta, the stories kind of are there in front of you. You look at the headlines of the newspapers and it's about corruption. It's about migrant boats coming from Libya. It was a huge issue sort of when I first started thinking about it. The Maltese government got very tight links with Libya. There was a lot of stuff about oil smuggling. There was a big oil smuggling sanction busting trial. And Malta's got some shallows off the coast, and the water's about 30 meters deep. And it's outside territorial waters. And at night, if you fly into Malta, you see all the lights on the ships. And it's all sorts goes on there. It's called Bank. It's like a little city, and you have Russian ships there, and you have oil smuggling, sanction busting, all sorts of things goes on. And because it's beyond territorial waters, a blind eye gets turned. So lots of things like that sort of caught my attention and interested me. And I thought if I could piece all this together, at least I've got the makings of book number 1. When I did it, that was great. I really enjoyed doing it. And I hope people enjoyed the result. and then all the time I'm always gathering snippets of information, little bits and pieces which you can actually use as components for future plot lines. But fundamentally they were there in front of me, so the thing came about sort of quite naturally, really. It wasn't a great lifelong ambition or anything.
You may be the first person that has ever given me that answer, that it was just you've not even said, oh, it was something I kind of thought maybe I'd get to one day, it's something that was always in the back of my mind. But for you, it was just, okay, this is just what I'm going to do now.
I'm a great believer, if you sort of just put one foot in front of the other, you get there eventually. It sounds, I don't really sound arrogant about it at all, because I read books and I'm in awe at the skill of the people who I encounter and the authors that I encounter. I don't profess to be anywhere like that at all, but I think if you take care, I've got an editor, and I listened to what the editor said. The first book I wrote, the first version was first person. She said, forget it, you're going to have to go back and just put it in, obviously in third person. It's the easiest one to work with. So I chucked it and wrote it again. So it wasn't just, that it fell on the page and hey presto, it was done. There was an exercise involved. And I wrote some other stuff which I'd sent to her, and when it was just starting to get under my skin a little bit, she would put that to one side, and we'll try something else. So there was a learning involved, and I'm very grateful that she took me on and took me through that process.
And I think you're selling yourself very short there, Tony, saying that there are lots of books, and lots of them, they're all very different and they all have different appeal, but you are right up there with the rest of them. One thing I can say for definite with Holbeck books, it's a mark of quality. I have never yet picked up a Holbeck book that I haven't loved.
Yeah.
So they know exactly what they're doing.
I'm working my way through the back catalogue of them, and they're great. The authors are all very tight. There's a lot of mutual support goes on.
Yeah.
I never met people, but you get a sense of them from their social media sort of input and so on, and you do feel as though you're part of a clan, and that's been nice too. And Adrian and Rebecca are fantastic people, very supportive.
Yeah, they're lovely.
Adrian and Rebecca, boss-ess. Yeah, I mean they're great, and they've got good editorial eye as well. So I get double input really. So that's a help.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we should mention the 150th episode of the Hobcast. Of all the things that I suddenly forget, this thing that I listened to. So, Rebecca, I'll tell you, I started it today, and then I said to Tony before we went live, I had to stop just before you joined, because I realised that I can't listen on the same day that I'm going to interview you. I have to wait until after we've done ours. Otherwise, I'll get really confused between what I've heard on there and have we just spoken about this? Am I repeating myself? So
yeah, well, as we said,
I'm guessing you had great fun on there because they're always brilliant.
It was good conversation. It was a good conversation, and I think as as the series develops, there's more to talk about. There's a sort of the narrative arc of the characters across the series, and there's what are you going to do with it next? It's and I never really know what the answers are to these questions. If I start a book out, I've got a vague idea where I want to get to, but the narrative and the characters tend to take over and blindside you sometimes. You end up in a totally different place than where you intended. And as it is with the series, I've now written book 6, and book 6 is going through the editing process. So I know what's going to happen in book 6. But it was to repeat something we talked about on the Hobcast. It's the characters age. They change. They live a life. They sort of. There's the daughter of George. She got a boyfriend, and then she got engaged, had an engagement party. Then she got married, and then she got pregnant and had a baby. Gina. Gina. She progressed through life, so things have changed. And I use the example of Donna Leon, and the sort of Commissario Brunetti. I've got a friend who's got like 23 books on the shelf, and they're all the same. Brunetti gets no older; he still lives at home. And, nothing really changes in his life. He has different stories and different episodes, But to me, that sort of that wouldn't work for me. I don't think. I
Doesn't
like the
appeal to
kind
you
of
at all.
no. I like the fact that the characters change, and George grows up. He sort of develops a bit of a moral compass, and he matures as the series matures. So there's changes to him, and as a from my perspective, it's good to see. And the things that he does in book 5 and book 6, he wouldn't be capable of doing in book 1 because he's even more bumbling and more accident prone in book 1 than he is in the later books. So that's been of interest, and that's why I kind of say now unashamedly, yeah, it's a series, and really they should be read in sequence. It's rather than just pick it up and read it as a standalone.
Yeah, definitely. Which is okay. I will get to that comment in a minute. I'm guessing that's Rebecca. Yeah. We've got hello from Kaz and Janet and Donna. Sarah has said. Now I believe was Sarah Blackburn on the blog tour.
Yes, I think she might have been.
Yeah, I think she might have been. She says she loves George. Will there be more with Denzel? Now, I thought this was really interesting, seeing how poor Marianne.
Well,
you're so mean, Tony.
No, I love Marianne. I think she's great. But no, George needs a foil. And in the early books, so he had Abdullah, and the pair of them were a great pair. But again, after book 3, I thought you can't keep kind of trotting that out and repeating that. You need to freshen it up. So I thought about bringing Denzel in as George's foil. And Denzel is pretty straight. He's a figure of rectitude. He's sort of, he obviously had his moments in book 1, and I think he's past that now. He's all grown up, and he's quite kind of not sort of scathing of his father, but he watches him with a wary eye, and he corrects George's moral compass, and he's part of the process that George goes through in terms of standing up to Natasha Bonici and basically the antagonists in the cast, and he gets some mettle in the later books, and this largely comes about in part because he has Denzel by his side. So it's been great to play them together like
that. Somebody has said they want to try your rabbit pasta. There was another comment. You need to tell Sam about rabbit pasta, Tony. So one of the questions I was going to ask you, this will feed nicely into, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, rabbit pasta. It's the national. Well, it probably is the national dish of Malta. I did a short story for one of the last year's Hobeck Christmas book, which was a story about a criminal who couldn't stay away from Malta because he loved his mother's rabbit pasta so much, and came back and was arrested by George and Camilleri, and he thought it was all worthwhile just for one last taste of rabbit pasta. But fundamentally, rabbit, you slow cook it in the slow cooker. You make a good sort of rich tomato ragu, a good tomato sauce, and you serve it with tagliatelle, and right at the last minute, throw in peas and some greens. So it's sort of this lovely rich red studded with green, and you pick all the rabbit meat off the bone. Rabbit can be quite bony, but if it's soft, if it's a nice soft meat, mixed up into a sauce and served with tagliatelle with some grated parmesan on top, and that's how it's done. See, the secret is out.
I think you are far more adventurous than I am. I have not, nor will I be eating rabbits. Not tried it.
Well, I must admit, I went. I sort of explored the island on a mountain bike. I go all over the place. I've been cycling for years, and I came across the Watership Down Happy Bunny Farm.
Oh, right, okay.
I can tell you, I don't think there were many happy bunnies in there. It was a big concrete block it was open. So it's my kind of. I've become a little bit more particular about where I get the rabbits from. But it was like a big chicken farm. You could smell it before you could see it. It was pretty horrid. So I'm probably not serving that as often as I used to.
I think it's because where we used to live, I'd never really thought about rabbit as a dish anyway, but where we used to live on the back fields in North Yorkshire, there were wild rabbits everywhere. And I know some of the lads used to kind of I don't know if this still happens, but they used to kind of, you know, take a few home with them, shall we say, at a
Yeah,
weekend.
exactly.
Maybe sell them to the local butcher. We're talking a long time ago. And I was just horrified by the idea of it. And I just never quite got over it.
I think they lost a lot of popularity in the 50s because the myxomatosis. They introduced the disease to keep the population down. So certainly my dad's generation refused to eat rabbit because it was seen as a kind of a diseased meat. But that was 50 years ago. So
There's a bit
anyway,
of a rabbit
there was a diversion. Didn't expect to talk about rabbits.
There's a bit of a rabbit debate in the in the comments. People used to have rabbit stew. Sarah was force fed it at school. Oh,
at school?
Okay. I don't even know where to go with that, Sarah, so I'm going to move right on. Donna said she knew we were friends for a reason. Yeah, don't think we'll be having that. One of the things, you've just brought up cycling. You're quite an adventurous traveller.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about that, because I read that in your bio and I thought, well, I feel like I've not really been anywhere in comparison. So where have you been and what has been great?
Well, I think the highlights, we came across to Malta in 2014, 15, and we said we would use the experience to A, explore Europe, and B, travel further afield. I've always loved campers, and I had this sort of idea of getting a camper, but with Malta, it's so tight and congested, getting camper was a bit of a non-starter. But a lot of the places we've been have actually set as destinations in the book. So local to Malta. In Last Bit of Paradise, it features Zagori in Greece, which is a wonderful sort of high plateau with 48 sort of wonderful villages around the side. It's on the northern end of Greece. And that was absolutely marvelous. Quiet, fantastic walking, and that was brilliant. Obviously, Etna, Sicily is only it's an hour and a half on the car ferry. So I know Sicily really, really well. We go across there just to see some greenery because Malta's a hot rock, basically. So in the summer, it's good to take the car across there. But, the highlights, we did South America, quite a lot in South America. We went across on buses across Argentina and over into Chile. So I did a coast to coast on that across the Andes, which was absolutely fantastic. Down to the south of Chile, we went to Japan. I love Japan. I love Japanese food. Janet, my wife, hates it, so obviously it's double helpings for me. We went to stayed in a place which was basically a gourmet type sort of hotel. All sort of strip off and get into the bath and everything else. They have all this bathing going on. I refuse to do it. I wait until it's all finished and then going in my Speedos late at night. But they were bringing in snow crabs, and the snow crab season lasts something like about 2 weeks. And they're about $100 each per crab. And Janet just turned around and refused to eat it. So, but anyway, we had wonderful trips there. North Africa, we've done quite a lot of touring in North Africa, so that was quite interesting. I hadn't been to Libya, but Tunisia and Egypt and Israel and these places, and you get a good sense of the Mediterranean basin. Turkey, quite a lot of trips to Turkey. Enjoy Turkey very, very much. Wonderful, wonderful place. And Istanbul, I think, is probably one of my favourite cities. So, we travel a lot, and we probably haven't got back into the swing of it after COVID. That sort of knocked us off kilter a bit.
Yeah.
So we'll pick up on that as soon as we can. But yeah, no, I love traveling.
So have you got a wish list of places still to visit?
I've always had this idea of traveling across the States. I've fallen out of love with the States a bit with Trump, but I'd like to go to Canada and probably do it, to the north, through the forests and so on. I'd like to do that coast to coast there. I do feel as though South America probably needs a bit more attention. Janet speaks Spanish, so that's a great help. But there are certain places you go and you really do feel a long way from home. I'd like to go to Korea. In Japan, it's totally different. You know, the language is different.
Mm.
You know, there's not a lot of English spoken in Tokyo. There is, but you end up taking photographs of the street names on your phone and just showing it to a taxi driver. You know, 'cause you can't sort of find your way around and navigate like that. I'd like to go to the stands. You know, the Kazakhstan, places like that. We know some people there. So yeah, the list is good. You know, you live once. You know, you got to see a bit of stuff. So
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody has asked, and unfortunately I can't see the name. I'm sorry. If your character matures through the series, is there an end book?
well, that's the thing. You see, unfortunately, it has to end somewhere, doesn't it? I mean, you can get into separate things. You know, you can change the emphasis.
Mm.
You know, the suggestion might be that rather than George being a bit of an accidental all-action hero, he becomes some eminence squeeze, you know, for Denzel or something like that. Or maybe, you know, you take the two powerful sort of female figures, Natasha and Greca, and maybe you can put a spin-off around those two because they're, you know, are set up to go head-to-head, really. So I think there's things that you can do, but poor George can't go hobbling on into his dotage, you know, being chased around by gangs of ISIS terrorists and things like that. He's got to put his feet up at some point. It's only fair on the guy.
I actually asked an author this the other day, and it was the first time I thought about it really. Social media, when you're writing books that have terrorism, different things like that in the plots, have you found that a problem? I'm going to ask the Beck of Hobeck. Has that been a problem for you with publishing different books? Have you found it has been an issue with social media, or have you been kind of touch wood lucky so far?
No, we haven't. I mean, haven't had any issues at all, really. I think, you know, were there to be sensitivities to it, you know, you would have picked it up in. I say it would have been picked up in Malta. I mean, Malta obviously has got a Muslim population, and I suspect that things are pretty sensitive. But no, it hasn't been a difficulty. It hasn't been a difficulty. I mean, I try and be respectful. You know, I try and sort of certainly when you're dealing with things such as you know, the sequence of prayers and you're touching on the religious aspect of things, then you know, I do check it, and you know, it's not just a cursory glance at Google. You know, I do ask people who know about this stuff. You know, is this how it happens? And that has been one of the good things about the book. You know, it's led me to spend quite a lot of time sort of exploring the Hadith and, you know, getting to understand, you know, Islamic culture. Because I was spent 30 years in Bradford, but you know, as a sort of, you know, I never really had cause to investigate it when I lived in Bradford, but doing the books I have done. So no, I haven't had any trouble with that, and fingers crossed. I wouldn't want to, you know, but I do try and tread carefully. I'm aware
I was thinking more the aspect of Facebook picking up on certain keywords. You know, they have the algorithms that look for certain things.
Oh, I see. So yeah, no, there was something. I've tried to do a little bit of research with ChatGPT-4 and things like that, and they sort of turn around and say, you know, you're researching a gun is not very nice. We can't help you with this one. You know, it's things like that. They do come back, and you know, this is. You know, it's if you explore things, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the exact thing, but I was quite taken aback by it. But I haven't really had anything via Google. I think if you look at most authors' Google search histories, I think the police would be very, very interested in them. You know.
Well, Janet has said, "Ask him about his search history!" Exclamation! Exclamation!
Well, I think there's the answer. It's pretty broad, and if you know, research and write about the sort of things that I do, which includes terrorism and you know, the trouble in the world, you know, you're always poking your nose into all sorts of things, and sometimes you know you strike gold. You know, it's like I found one particular search which was, I just couldn't believe it. And the Maltese police had picked up a container filled with banknotes, literally, and that came into book 2. And they found it in the container, sort of the container port, and it was Libyan pounds, Libyan lira, being printed in Russia. and it was for the rebels there, for the rebels to buy, pay their guys and buy gas, and they couldn't get money from the central bank in Tripoli, so they had to get cash from somewhere. Russians printed it for them and lost it in Malta. So that formed part of the plot, So things like that drop out, but that's more through research than sort of just falling into it on Google or anything like that.
Janet's just said dinars. I'm fairly certain we've got some dinars knocking around somewhere in the house.
Some
dinars.
Oh, dinars, yeah. Well, nothing to do with me if we have.
No, absolutely not. It's interesting, just to build on what you were saying. You mentioned earlier about headlines being a good source of inspiration. And between that and what you've just said, it's made me wonder how much of this is based on actual events that have happened that you've then how much of it is your take on the story woven through with your characters. Sounds like you've got quite a good balance there.
I think for instance, if you take the fact that, it's those 3 paragraphs that the police had found a container full of cash, and that was all it was, it was like, it's in Libyan dinar and what's it doing in Malta? And from there, I kind of backtracked and said, okay, well, it must have come from somewhere. So it's probably come from the Russians. It's come from a Russian mint. And then you get into the fact, well, how do they actually, you go down the rabbit hole, how do they print it? What sort of paper do they use for a banknote? I never really thought about that, really. What trees would they use to make the pulp for the banknote? It turns out they use a particular type of larch or something, and they have a particular type of paper. So it's researching, you research it back. And then, you get the story from that particular point. And then, of course, from that came the plot line that someone, Natasha Bonici, wants to steal it. So of course, you have the container in transit. And how do you steal a container? So when it's at sea. So again, I just started researching what sort of software programs they use to manage the haulage of containers. What do you need to do to take it off at a certain port? So it all gets very tedious, and something which is like half a page of plot can probably take me at times, 4 or 5 days to work my way around. But the headline will give me the idea. Then you obviously have to sort of pin a sort of a part of a narrative to it to fit it in. But I'm not completely devoid of ideas, so I do have some original ones.
No, you really do. It's just interesting to see how much of it is, something that could or does really happen.
Well, even things like international treaties, in book, I think it was book 3, there was the thing that, Turkey has kind of got very exercised about its maritime rights and its ability to drill in that eastern end of the Mediterranean. And normally you have this sort of 12-mile sort of boundary around an island. So Greece, of course, have these territorial waters based on 12 miles around an island. They have so many islands that they're more or less covered. Mediterranean, the Turks can't get any access to it. So the Turks and the Libyans got together and decided that they were going to merge their 2 continental shelf districts. And this created a huge furor. It hasn't been resolved yet, but there's all sorts of minerals and all sorts of wealth under that particular part of the ocean. And it's all part of this ongoing antagonism between the Greeks and the Turks. And they could fight over everything, and they have been for donkey's years. So things like that, again, became part of the plot line. And all I saw was a headline about the treaty. And that kind of got me thinking, well, Turkey and Greece, again, and that became the basis of a big chunk of book 3.
Sorry, be quite careful.
That was a bit boring. I'll try.
No. That was not boring at all. No, it's really interesting to hear how you go about it and the things that you found while you've been researching, things that we just wouldn't expect. So no, it's not boring, not one little bit. This is Janet saying, "Are the birds of paradise real? Do they exist?" I want to be really careful about that question.
Well, the birds of paradise actually do exist, or did exist. Reference to them existed. I don't know whether they ever did anything, and I'm probably just going to skirt around it because it's a bit of a spoiler, really.
Yeah, this is the thing. Thanks, Janet. You've given us a challenge.
but yeah, the birds of paradise certainly did exist in Syria. So that was again something which kind of triggered. I mean, I went looking for it, and it was always my intention to write about that particular aspect of terrorism, and I tried to validate it and found reference to a group of people, small people, who were up to that sort of thing, that he tried to desperately avoid giving the game away.
Yeah.
And that they were so called, the Birds of Paradise. So that's why I took the name. Yeah.
And it's a great name for a book. It really is. Somebody has asked, it was Sarah, are you, have you got any book festivals next year?
I've never been to a book festival. I've never been. And I think sort of, because I'm new to the game, I'm just learning the ropes, really. This is, the first book was only published about.
You are on book 5
ago.
though, and book 6 is already with the editor, so you're not as new as you letting on.
But I think, you see, I had 3 published almost within a very short period of time. When I met Adrian and Rebecca, I had 3 books done, and I was going to start to, and I read that if you have 3 books and you launch them quickly, that's the way to do it, rather than just launch one and then everybody forgets about that. You make more of an impact if you could do a quick series of launches. So they were sort of sitting good to go, but in terms of the industry and understanding how the industry works, I'm learning day by day. I sort of it's all total news to me. And I went to the Malta Book Fair and the book festival. And I'm trying to get I'm working with a publisher to get the first one, Bodies in the Water, translated into Maltese. So I went along to see a couple of people at the Malta Book Festival. And interestingly, every school child in Malta goes to it. And they bust them in. And there's a big emphasis on getting books in the hands of children, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
It was great. Not so much.
I was just going to ask what the kind of culture for reading's like in Malta, for crime fiction in particular.
Not good, really. No, certainly not in. You get sort of the English language stuff. You get Colleen Hoover all over the place, and there's quite a bit of English language. And there's one distributor who distributes my books, and they have about 20 stores across the island. And really, they call the shots, and they'll have all the names that you would expect. Stephen King and all this sort of thing. But in terms of Maltese literature, it's all about the lives of the saints and the chapels and the churches. So there's not a lot in the Maltese language, and I think a lot of the books are there. I think it's for the tourists. Malta has about a population of 500,000, 30,000 English.
Right. Okay.
I might have my numbers wrong, but I'm not certain that the Maltese are big readers. It's I don't think it's part of the culture. Certainly not in their own language. But they're trying. This is part of the thing that the government is now giving grants to translators to translate English works into Maltese language. So the publisher's great. Oh, I'll get a grant. I'll get it translated. It'll be fine. So we'll see. Anyway, but I find that was quite sort of entertaining thing. See George being in his natural language. It's quite good.
Yeah, absolutely. This is from Malcolm. Nicosia, the only divided city still.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you're quite familiar with Nicosia.
I know Nicosia. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I'll have to have a think about it. That could be a possibility. Thank you, Malcolm, for putting that little thought into my mind. It's Cyprus, isn't it? Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I've never been to Cyprus. Crete, I haven't been to Cyprus. So I know about the north and the south and the Turks and the Greeks and 2000. Was that 19? I forget what it was. 1976.
I couldn't tell you the year.
1973, I think, was the Civil War. Yeah. So interesting. It's a possibility. Thank you, Malcolm.
I did actually watch a documentary, and I'm not sure if it's still available on Netflix or one of the other streaming services. There was a series called Dark Tourist, and the journalist is called David, I think it's Farrier, and it was really interesting. He kind of got to go near bits, and there were some shots from different places, and it looked quite frightening actually, him trying to get near it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but it was really interesting. He visited lots of places all over the world and saw lots of different things, and yeah, really fascinating. I think there's about, I think it's one series with about 6 episodes, but they visit
Okay.
a few places in each one. It was really interesting.
David Farrier. Yeah.
I think
I
he's
suppose
from New
that's it.
Zealand.
Yeah. Because obviously Northern Cyprus is a bit of a den of iniquity, isn't it? It's famous for its sort of banking fraud and money laundering and Russian dark dealings. So it's natural territory for George, really. Yeah.
You must have a lot of fun with some of these characters. I mean, Natasha is wild.
I do like Natasha. Well, you see, she has she's on a bit of a downer in book 6, I think. So, or book 5. So the question is, will she bounce back or not? I mean, or is that the end of Natasha? So yeah, no, she's good. We were talking with Adrian when we did the podcast about what characters look like and how you actually visualize characters. He was saying that she looked a bit like he's a Sophia Loren in her pomp, and then he said, or Penelope Cruz. And I thought, yeah, Penelope Cruz. That's probably how I see her in my mind's eye. So, but with George, I was saying I struggle to sort of. I know what he's like in sort of shape and hair color and coloring and sort of mannerisms, but I find it hard to kind of put a face on him. You know, so it's quite odd, really, that your main character is not like sort of impressed on you. You know, it's I don't have a picture stuck up on the corner of the screen or anything like that.
I always find it interesting, yeah, when authors kind of have, they'll have a big board with a plan and images of different actors or people that they think would be, and I don't think I really picture characters as I read them.
No, well, a lot of authors now avoid making the descriptions because it's you can sort of find yourself wandering into all sorts of sexist tropes and things like that. It's so I think I did read somewhere that it's kind of this trend now to avoid descriptions. I do tend to describe people. I think it's helpful. I think it's interesting to know what someone is wearing, for example. What their clothes are. It gives it can give you an indication of background or how they see themselves or what face they're putting onto the world. You don't really need to have a kind of detailed physical description of them, unless that physical description is shock or surprise, or it's showing some emotional reaction or response. Then you have to describe that. But yeah, it's a bit of an odd one. But I don't do that. I don't have storyboards or anything of that sort. I kind of I let the characters lead the way to a large extent. Malcolm
said he lived there, so you can talk to him.
I shall do that.
Yeah. And Donna, I think this was Donna, said that Don Jolly also did something about dark. It was Donna, dark tourism places. Right. And then she also said, for someone that doesn't have mental images, we need some description. I always think I'll get a feel for the person rather than how they look. It's more how I feel about them as a character and their actions and where I think their morals are and, how interesting they are and what their interests are. That kind of, I think that must be what I'm more drawn to than the potential looks of a character.
But I think you can do a lot from the way someone speaks and what they say. The sort of the character which is in the book, who is the assistant commissioner Camilleri. I see him as very patrician, and he speaks formally. It's he doesn't speak. He doesn't have informal speech patterns. And I write it formally. So when the words flow through my head, it's a bit of RP. That's how I get it. I mentioned the fact that he keeps his jacket buttoned. And, he'll undo his jacket when he sits down. I'm trying to get that kind of feel of formality, of authority, of cold reserve about him, and you can do that without kind of saying as much. And I think that's probably part of the art, really. to sound rather grand.
How about the idea of the fact that, you know, you're writing thrillers, there's a lot going on, but they really have heart to them as well. You know, you develop a kind of almost a friendship with the characters, and you're really intrigued to see what they're doing, but also how they react with each other. And, you know, some of the scenes in this book could, if the heart wasn't there, it would be very, very difficult to read some of the scenes. But that that care that you develop in the situations, I'm being really careful to kind of avoid saying anything too specific. It's quite tricky, but you need the heart in these books, and you've balanced that really well.
I think so. I think one of the things I was very conscious of was, and when we, you know, it goes back to what we were talking about when we first started the conversation about what your motivation was. And while I was sitting on aeroplanes going to and from Malta to the UK, you know, I was getting through, you know, book after book after book, and I got tired of the quintessential, you know, British detective, be he Scandinavian, Scottish, or, you know, Northern England, you know, the one who drinks too much, he's probably divorced, he might have a kind of, you know, an interesting assistant, or a, you know, a kind of a forensic sort of, you know, sort of, you know, involved with a forensic investigator as a foil. And it seemed to me very kind of stereotypic. And what I wanted to do was to try and write something which had an anti-hero. So George, of course, is the perfect anti-hero. And as he's an anti-hero, you know, it seems that, you know, you make him a family man, and you do get involved in the sort of the softer side of people, and you can make that funny, you know. And that was the other thing about bringing, you know, humor into the books. And
Yeah,
you know, I like to think I'm a funny guy, you know, maybe not that funny, but I enjoy humor, you know, put it like that. And it tickles me to do it, you know, and to interject humor where it's least expected. I find that quite gratifying. You know, if I go back and, you know, flick a book and I find something, and, you know, that'll make me laugh. And sometimes you know, there's a chapter in there which doesn't really move the plot on particularly, but actually it's just a funny chapter, and it just lightens the mood a bit. It changes gear. You know, and episodes in the household. You know, it's I kind of see that as a little bit of soap opera. And you know, again, people seem to like it and enjoy it. I like it. It breaks the story up, and as you say, it softens some of the other hard edge stuff that's in there.
Yeah, and it's really necessary. Yeah.
It's not all just guns and bombs and you know, Natasha being nasty to people. You know, it's,
which there is nothing wrong with at all. I just think the way you've worked the other elements in, it really adds depth. You know, it adds more layers, and it draws the reader in more. Sarah is saying, you describe Malta so well when her dad was based there for the RAF. But she didn't know the place as she was a baby.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people say that. I mean, it's the armed forces left in the mid-70s. It became sort of independent of the UK in the mid-60s, and then they have a thing called Freedom Day, which was when the Navy sailed out and disappeared off. But it's got a lot of heritage sites, which is based around sort of the Second World War and the presence of the Brits. Lots of buildings and ex-barracks and married estates of married quarters and things like that. So a lot of people have passed through it, and even my dad was a merchant seaman. He was an engineer, and when he heard I was going to Malta, he was. I've got a couple of bills in bars around there which remain unpaid, you know. So it was a good big stopping off point for the Americans, for the Australians, and the Brits. So yeah, it's when she came back, she'd find it very, very different now. It's very, very developed, and it's changed in the 9-10 years that we've been here dramatically. A lot of EU money. They fixed the roads. The buildings are getting taller and taller and taller. There's a boom. and it's a small place, and it's getting overpowered. It's getting swamped. You know, it's a lot of the building is not particularly sympathetic to the, you know, the historic kind of beauty that is around it. And yeah, it's if she's going to come back and have a look, she should do so quickly.
There you go, Sarah. There's the advice. I know you mentioned, and I'm not sure if this was before the interview or during, that you've been reading some of the, you're working your way through the whole back catalogue, basically. It made me wonder about reading before you started to write. Were you a big reader before?
I've always been a reader. Yeah, always been a big reader. Eclectic, all sorts of things. I will read. I like crime fiction, but then I will try and read something more serious. You know, some sort of more literary kind of book, a more literary book. And then I will sort of, if I get through that, reward myself with 2 more crime fiction books. So I'll dip in and out of them. I do the book list most years. So and I read quite a bit of non-fiction. Very interested in biographies, political biographies. So yeah, books have always been part of my life. Yeah, ever since, you know, Biggles and Enid Blyton, you know, it was. I've always had books and always been a reader.
I think that was Malcolm that has said, "Call someplace paradise, kiss it goodbye." It's very apt.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, exactly. It's it's a shame, really. I mean, Valletta is a fabulous place. It's one of the, and there are places in Malta that, you know, are World Heritage sites, and you say, "Why haven't I heard about this?" You know, Mdina, which is the walled city, the old capital. It's an absolutely beautiful place, fantastic, and you know, I'd never heard of it before. When I walked in, I was absolutely amazed. And it's got so much history, you know. It's like Rome, you know. Rome is layered with history, you know. And, Malta's the same. You know, you go back and there's a lot of prehistoric stuff still around. You know, old temples which have been restored, which are fascinating. Then of course you've got from the 16th century, you got all the Knights of St. John, who came across from Rhodes, and before that from Jerusalem, and they were here until Napoleon's time, sort of, you know, the late 1700s. And their history and what they've done with the island, a lot of their buildings are still there. And Valletta was built by the Knights. Fantastic fortifications. And of course, Napoleon sailed in, had a couple of years. The Maltese decided they didn't like him, so they kicked him out. Got the Brits to come and help. And of course, as was the Brits' wont, they never left. So they stayed here until the 60s. But during that time, obviously, there was the whole of World War II, you know, the World War II episode, where Malta is right between Sicily and North Africa. So it controlled, you know, the sort of the sea routes. And I think Malta, you know, it has the George Cross on its flag. It was one of the most bombed places on earth. Flattened, absolutely flattened, by the Germans and by the Italians. So the Maltese have got a bit of ambivalence about their near neighbours, the Italians. And at one point after that, when they were trying to recover from the decimation, there was talk of them actually joining, amalgamating with the UK, becoming part of the UK. But that didn't happen. And they went in a different direction. But the Second World War legacy is still there. Lots of underground bunkers, and you know, NATO were here. The Suez campaign was administered from deep underneath Valletta, from the tunnels underneath Valletta, which are all still there. And all the pushboards, you know, when you saw the, you know, the brass standing on a gantry shouting instructions, and the women had, you know, pushing the aeroplanes and the ships around. All that's still there. You can see it all. So it's fantastic history. It's absolutely great. Meanwhile, someone up top is building a 15-story hotel over it, you know. But that's just the way of things.
You were saying earlier that you've visited everywhere that you've written about. Was there anywhere that, I'm just thinking about how much you're saying that Malta's changing. Was there anywhere that you had to do a bit more research on because it had changed so much since you visited?
There was a few things. I mean, I think I wrote about I had this kind of thing that I knew Etna, that I knew Sicily, and book 4 is set around there. But I made some big mistakes there. I kind of and we went back to have a look at it and walk on the lava fields and do a little bit more research on it. And there was an episode. One of the characters goes to get a hair done every week, and she jumps in a car and goes from point A to Catania. And I realised that it was a 2.5-hour drive. So she wasn't going to get a hair done like that. And so certain things, the scale of it, the scale of how I misjudged entirely just how massive it is. So, I mean, that was one thing. And there were some points around the geography of Istanbul, which were a problem as well, which I got totally wrong. Bridges that went in the wrong direction and this sort of stuff, and things that were, there've been a few things, but you can cover an awful lot of ground with Google Maps, Google Earth. You can really get a sense of it, and if you have the Google Earth opened in front of you, and you've got another screen which has got the flora and the fauna and the topography and the underlying geography, you can see whether it's a volcanic sort of landscape or a limestone sort of landscape. Get a real sense of what that place looks like, and particularly places where you can't go, like the Libyan desert. I've never been to a Libyan desert. I have no intention of going to a Libyan desert. But
Janet's just sad. I bet he's never been to Libya.
Not those parts. No, not those parts. That's for sure. But but you get a real feel for them. And North Africa, and there's a lot of sort of the Arab world feel in Malta. It's got limestone blocks, flat roofs, and when you see pictures of sort of I don't know, Israel or Egypt or Morocco even, there's bits of Malta really do feel like that, with the kind of the Arabesque balconies sticking out. So it has got that mix, even though fundamentally it's it's more Italian and European. And it's kind of its health systems and its financial system and its legal system, its infrastructure feels North African. So it's quite a weird place in that sense.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but we've got 2 minutes left, Tony.
Really?
2 minutes.
I'm glad. I've got to go get my dinner.
I'm glad my voice has held out this long. I've started to dither now a little bit, so I think we've done fairly well. I've got a bit red. So,
okay, all right. Well, I hope I haven't talked too much, but
no, this has been it's a lovely way to spend an evening. I said that I really enjoyed your interview with Kaz a while ago, and I was really glad that I got a chance to chat with you this time.
Great. No, it's been excellent. So I mean, I do thank you very much for having me on. It's great to talk to them. Have that little interaction with the rest of the guys and the people who've put the questions on your screen. So thank you to them for showing them interest.
Yeah. Thank you to everyone who's watched, but really doubly thank you to you, Tony, for coming and entertaining me. But do you want to give everyone a reminder of this brilliant book? The fabulous quality of a Holbeck book as well, because they don't just read beautifully. They're such good quality, and that's such a nice thing when you're holding a paperback that feels nice as well.
I'm going to give a shout out to the cover designer as well.
Yeah, please do.
The cover designer is Josh Collins, Rebecca's son, who is just starting a graphic.
I saw his name and didn't make the connection.
Yeah, just starting out doing graphic design, and Rebecca said, "Would you mind if he had a shot at it?" And I saw it and I thought, "Great, it's a wrap. We'll have that one." So, thank you, Josh.
Yeah, brilliant covers for the whole series.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you everyone for watching, and good night.